Beat him and I'll marry you. Elena Cross pointed her champagne glass at the janitor standing by her $1 million chessboard. Her executives laughed. Camera phones rose. And David Stone, 53 years old, 30 years of mopping floors, a name badge nobody ever read, felt something crack open inside his chest. He should have walked away. He had bills to pay. A mother's medical debt still haunting him. A job he couldn't afford to lose. But some words don't let you walk away. What happened next would cost Elena Cross everything she'd built. And it would start with 12 moves she never saw coming. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. David Stone had been invisible for 27 years. That was the job. You push the cart. You empty the trash. You wipe the glass so clean that executives can see their own reflections and never once see you. 27 years at Apex Industries, and David had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. He knew every floor of that building, every corner, every late-night secret whispered in conference rooms by people who forgot the cleaning staff had ears. He'd seen 3 CEOs come and go. Watched young analysts climb to vice presidents, then crash back down when the market turned. He'd cleaned up champagne from promotions and tears from terminations. Nobody ever asked his name. That was fine. David didn't need recognition. He needed the paycheck. He needed the health insurance that barely covered his medications. He needed the routine that kept his mind from wandering to darker places. But tonight was different. Tonight something in the air felt charged. Electric. Like the moment before a storm breaks. It was past 7. The building had emptied out except for the executive floor, where the lights still blazed and laughter echoed off the glass walls. David pushed his cart toward the service elevator, ready to finish his rounds and catch the 8:15 bus home. Then he heard her voice. "James, you couldn't beat a child at this game. Admit it." Elena Cross, CEO, the woman whose face was on magazine covers and whose name was whispered with a mix of fear and awe throughout the industry. David had cleaned her office for 3 years. She never once looked at him. "I'm telling you, Elena, I've been practicing," James Porter said. Vice President of Product. A man who wore his ambition like cologne, strong enough to smell from across the room. "Set up the board. Let's go." David should have kept walking. He didn't. Something pulled him toward the executive lounge. Maybe curiosity. Maybe fate. Maybe just the fact that he hadn't seen a chess game in 15 years, and the memory of it ached like an old wound. The lounge was all glass and chrome. A dozen executives stood around a table made of quartz drinks in hand, watching Elena arrange pieces on a board that probably cost more than David's annual salary. She wore white. Always white, like she was daring the world to find a stain on her. David stopped at the edge of the room pretending to adjust his cart. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever did. "First move?" Elena said, sliding a pawn forward. "Don't embarrass yourself, James." Porter laughed and countered. The moves came fast. Sloppy. Neither of them was good, David could see that immediately. They played chess the way rich people played golf, for show, not for skill. Elena captured Porter's bishop with a flourish. "See, this is why I run the company." "That was a sacrifice," Porter protested. "I let you take it." "Sure you did." The crowd chuckled. Expensive laughter. The kind that comes from people who've never worried about rent. David's hands tightened on his cart. He knew he should leave. Every instinct told him to disappear the way he always did. But his eyes stayed fixed on the board, reading the position like a language he'd never forgotten. Porter was losing. Badly. But not because Elena was good. Because Porter kept making the same mistake, pushing too hard too fast, ignoring the quiet squares that would cost him everything. 3 more moves, and it was over. "Checkmate," Elena announced, standing back with her arms crossed. "Again." The applause was polite but hollow. Porter rubbed his neck, embarrassed. "Come on, someone else," Elena said, scanning the room. Anyone? Don't tell me I'm the only one here who can play. That's when her eyes landed on David. For a moment, he thought she was looking past him through him the way people always did. But her gaze held, sharpened. A smile curled at the corner of her mouth. You, she said. The room went quiet. David's throat tightened. Ma'am, you've been standing there for 10 minutes. Elena picked up the white queen, rolling it between her fingers. Do you play? Every head turned toward him, a dozen pairs of eyes seeing him for the first time. The janitor, the invisible man, suddenly visible in all the wrong ways. I used to, David said carefully. A long time ago. Used to. Elena's smile widened. How charming. The maintenance man used to play chess. Someone snickered. David felt heat rise in his chest. It's probably been years since he touched a board, Porter said, recovering his confidence. Elena, leave the guy alone. No, no. Elena waved her hand. I'm curious. Come here, Mr. She squinted at his badge. Stone. David Stone. Come here, David. He didn't move. That wasn't a request. The silence pressed down on him. He could feel it, the weight of expectation, the suffocating certainty that whatever happened next would not end well for him. But David Stone had survived 53 years by knowing when to fight and when to fold. And right now, refusing the CEO of his company in front of her entire leadership team felt like a guaranteed trip to the unemployment line. He stepped forward. The crowd parted. He walked to the table, hands at his sides, acutely aware of his gray coveralls against their tailored suits. His work boots squeaked on the polished floor. Elena gestured to the chair Porter had vacated. Sit. David sat. The board gleamed between them, pieces still scattered from the last game. Elena began resetting them with practiced movements, white on her side, black on his. Now, she said, let's see what used to looks like. Ms. Cross. David's voice was steady, but his pulse hammered. I really should get back to work. Your work can wait. She finished arranging the pieces and leaned back. Unless you're scared. Another ripple of laughter. David's jaw tightened. I'm not scared, he said quietly. Good. Elena raised her glass. Then let's make it interesting. She looked around the room until her eyes found Porter. James, she said, you want a rematch? Porter blinked. What? Play him. Elena pointed at David. Beat the janitor, and I'll be very impressed. Porter's face shifted confusion, then amusement, then something harder. You want me to play the cleaning guy? Why not? You couldn't beat me. Maybe you'll have better luck with someone more. She paused, letting the silence do the work. Your speed. The insult landed. Porter's cheeks flushed, but he forced a laugh. Fine, he said, circling the table. Move over, Stone. Let's get this over with. David started to stand, but Elena held up her hand. No. Stay where you are, David. James will take white. Porter hesitated, then dropped into the chair across from David. The board sat between them like a battlefield. House rules, Porter said, adjusting his cuffs. Speed chess, 5 minutes each. Think you can keep up? David looked at the pieces. Black, defensive position, the color of patience. I'll manage, he said. Elena leaned against the table close enough that David could smell her perfume, something sharp and expensive that made his eyes water. Tell you what, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Let's make this really interesting. She turned to Porter, her smile bright and dangerous. Beat him, she said, and I'll marry you. The room exploded with laughter. Porter grinned, flattered and flustered. Deal, he said, playing along. I beat the custodian, you put a ring on it. More laughter. Clinking glasses. Someone wolf whistled. David sat perfectly still. He understood what was happening. He'd seen it before, not in boardrooms but in schoolyards, on street corners, in every place where power met powerlessness. This wasn't about chess. This was about entertainment. He was the joke, the punchline, the measuring stick for their amusement. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "Keep your head down, baby. Don't give them a reason." He'd spent his whole life following that advice, swallowing insults, smiling through humiliation, surviving. But something about tonight, something about the way Elena Cross looked at him like he was less than human, cracked open a door he'd kept locked for decades. "If I win," David said. The laughter died. Elena raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "If I win." David repeated, his voice low but clear. "What do I get?" The silence was absolute. Even the ice in the glasses stopped clinking. Porter snorted. "Buddy, you're not going to win." "But if I do?" David kept his eyes on Elena. "I want a handshake. And an apology." Someone gasped. A woman in the back covered her mouth. Elena's smile froze, then slowly reformed into something harder, colder. "An apology," she repeated. "For what?" "For the way you just spoke to me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved. Elena stared at him. Really stared for the first time. David met her gaze without flinching. His heart pounded so loud he was sure everyone could hear it, but his hands stayed steady on the table. "You've got nerve," Elena said finally. "I'll give you that." "Is that a yes?" She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Fine. You win, you get your handshake and your apology, but you won't win." She snapped her fingers at Porter. "Clock him." Porter hit the chess clock with a flourish. The timer started ticking. David looked at the board. It had been 15 years since he'd played a real game. 15 years since he'd sat across from anyone who mattered. But the patterns were still there, buried deep, waiting. His father had taught him. Sunday afternoons in a community center that smelled like floor wax and hope. The board's fair sun. Both sides start equal. That's more than you'll get most places. His father had been dead for 20 years. The community center was a parking lot now. But the lessons remained. David moved his knight. Porter responded quickly, too quickly. Confidence without calculation. His pieces lunged forward like soldiers charging without orders. David retreated, repositioned, built a quiet defense while Porter burned through his clock. "He's stalling," someone muttered. "Just finish him, James." Porter grinned and pushed his queen forward. Check. David blocked with a pawn. A simple move. Boring. Porter laughed. "That's your defense." "Come on, man. Give me something to work with." David said nothing. He moved his bishop to a square that looked meaningless. Elena leaned in, watching the board. "He's just delaying the inevitable, James. Put him out of his misery." "With pleasure." Porter captured David's knight with his rook, a triumphant slam of plastic on quartz. "There," Porter said. "Down a piece. How's that feel?" David studied the board for a long moment. The clock ticked. 2 minutes left. Then he moved his other bishop. Porter frowned. "What are you—" He stopped. Stared at the board. His hand hovered over his queen, then pulled back. "Wait," he said. The room shifted. People leaned forward, squinting at the position. "What's wrong?" Elena asked. Porter didn't answer. His eyes darted across the board, from his queen to David's bishops, from his king to the diagonal that had suddenly opened like a trap door. "He—" Porter swallowed. "He pinned my queen." "What?" "I can't move it. If I move it, he takes my rook. And if I don't—" Porter's voice trailed off. David moved a pawn, one square forward. The silence was suffocating. "He's threatening mate," someone whispered. "In 3 moves." Porter scrambled. His hand flew across the board rook. Here night there desperate moves to shore up a defense that was already crumbling. David didn't rush. He moved with precision, each piece finding its place like notes in a song he'd known his whole life. His clock ticked down 90 seconds, 60-30, but his hands never shook. Check, David said quietly. Porter's king retreated. The only square left. David's rook slid across the board. Check. Again the king moved. Cornered now. Trapped against the edge of the board with nowhere to run. David picked up his queen. The piece felt warm in his palm, solid and sure. He placed it gently on the final square. Checkmate. The word fell like a gavel. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Porter stared at the board, his mouth open, his face pale. The position was undeniable, his king boxed in, every escape route sealed. David leaned back in his chair. The clock showed 7 seconds remaining on his side. Porter's had run out 2 moves ago. Well, David said. I believe you owe me something, Ms. Cross. Elena's face was a mask. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so tight her knuckles went white. The crowd waited suspended between shock and disbelief. Camera phones trembled in uncertain hands. Someone let out a nervous laugh that died immediately. That was... Porter shook his head. How did you... You played scared, David said simply. You attacked because you thought you were supposed to. But you never saw the whole board. He stood up, his knees protesting after years of hard floors and long shifts. The handshake, Ms. Cross. And the apology. Elena didn't move. Her eyes burned into him, not with anger, David realized, but with something worse. Fear. The fear of someone who had just lost control of a situation she thought she owned. You cheated, she said. David blinked. Excuse me? You must have. Her voice rose. You're a janitor. You empty trash cans. You don't what? David's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. Don't think. Don't learn. Don't exist outside of what you decided I was the moment you looked at me. The words landed like blows. Elena stepped back. I made you a deal, David continued. In front of all these people, all I asked for was respect, a handshake, an apology. That's it. He extended his hand. The room held its breath. Elena looked at his hand, calloused, worn, the hand of a man who'd spent his life building things that rich people never noticed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, she reached out. Her fingers touched his. A brief cold contact. I'm sorry, she said through clenched teeth, for wasting your time. It wasn't a real apology. They both knew it. But David nodded once and let go. Thank you, he said. He turned and walked toward his cart, feeling every eye in the room on his back. His legs were shaking. His heart felt like it might burst through his chest. But he didn't stumble. He didn't rush. He pushed his cart to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. Behind him, he heard Elena's voice, sharp and commanding. Show's over. Everyone back to work. The elevator doors opened. David stepped inside. Just before they closed, he caught a glimpse of the room, the scattered executives, the abandoned chessboard, and Elena Cross standing alone, staring at the position that had just changed everything. The doors slid shut. David exhaled. His hands finally shook. He'd won. Against all odds, against every instinct that told him to stay invisible, he'd won. But as the elevator descended into the basement, he knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't over. Elena Cross wasn't the kind of woman who forgot a loss. And she definitely wasn't the kind of woman who forgave one. The bus ride home took 47 minutes. David sat in the back, staring out the window at the city lights, blurring past, replaying every move in his mind. Not the chess moves, those had been instinct muscle memory buried so deep he'd forgotten it was there. No, he kept replaying the moment Elena Cross's hand touched his. The coldness of it, the barely concealed rage behind her painted smile. He'd made an enemy tonight, a powerful one. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and frowned at the screen. 3 text messages from numbers he didn't recognize, a missed call. Then another buzz, a notification from an email account he barely used. He opened the first text. "Yo, is this the chess janitor? Someone posted the video. Bro, you're famous." David's stomach dropped. Video. Someone had recorded it. He opened the email. The subject line read, "You're a legend." The message contained nothing but a link. He clicked it. The video was shaky, filmed from somewhere in the back of the executive lounge. But the audio was clear enough. He heard Elena's voice, bright with mockery. "Beat him and I'll marry you." He heard Porter's confident laugh. And then he watched himself, gray coveralls, work boots, shoulders, hunched with the weight of years, sit down at that chessboard and dismantle a vice president in under 5 minutes. The clip had been posted 2 hours ago. It already had 40,000 views. David closed the app and leaned his head against the cold window. He should have felt proud, vindicated, something. Instead, all he felt was dread. The next morning, David arrived at Apex Industries at 5:47 a.m., same as always. He swiped his badge at the service entrance, nodded to the night security guard, and headed for the maintenance locker room to change into his uniform. Everything looked normal, felt normal. Maybe the video was just a blip, a momentary curiosity that would fade by lunch. Then he opened his locker and found a note taped inside. Report to HR. 8:00 a.m. Room 2107. No signature, no explanation. David stared at the paper for a long moment. His hands were steady, but his chest felt tight. He'd been called to HR exactly twice in 27 years. Once for a benefits enrollment issue. Once when his mother died and he needed bereavement leave. This was different. He spent the next 2 hours pushing his cart through empty hallways, doing his job pretending nothing had changed. But he felt eyes on him everywhere. Security cameras closed, office doors, the ghost of last night's laughter echoing off the glass walls. At 7:58 a.m., he took the elevator to the 21st floor. The HR suite looked like every corporate nightmare David had ever imagined: gray carpet, beige walls, the faint smell of recycled air and fear. A receptionist directed him to room 2107 without meeting his eyes. Inside, a woman waited behind a desk, covered in folders arranged with surgical precision. Her nameplate read, Margaret Drayden, Director of Compliance. She was maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back tight and glasses that made her eyes look too large for her face. "Mr. Stone," she said. "Please, sit." David sat. She opened a folder. His folder, he realized, seeing his employee photo clipped to the first page. 27 years, she said, flipping through pages. Excellent attendance. No disciplinary issues. Employee of the month March 2019. Yes, ma'am. And yet, she closed the folder and folded her hands on top of it. We find ourselves here. David said nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence was safer than speech. There was an incident last night, Drayden continued. In the executive lounge, you were involved. I was invited to play chess by Ms. Cross herself. Invited. Drayden's eyebrows rose slightly. That's one way to describe it. She asked me to sit down, in front of witnesses. I didn't force myself into anything. No one is saying you did. Drayden's voice was smooth, practiced. However, several employees have expressed discomfort about your behavior. David felt the first flash of anger, hot and quick, before he could smother it. My behavior? You were described as confrontational, aggressive even. You demanded an apology from the CEO in front of her leadership team. I asked for what she promised me if I won. A handshake and an apology. That was the deal. Everyone heard it. Drayden tilted her head. Deals. Promises. These are interesting words, Mr. Stone, but company policy is quite clear about appropriate conduct between staff and executive leadership. I didn't do anything inappropriate. That's a matter of perspective. David's jaw tightened. He could feel the trap closing around him, the careful language, the implied accusations, the way Drayden kept circling without ever landing a direct blow. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" he asked. Drayden smiled thinly. "No one is accusing you of anything, yet, but there are concerns. The video circulating online has attracted significant attention, unflattering attention, I might add, for the company. I didn't post that video. No, but you're in it, and your actions have created a narrative that reflects poorly on Apex Industries." David leaned forward. "My actions, I played chess. I won. I asked for the respect I was promised. That's it. You embarrassed the CEO in front of her staff. She embarrassed herself." The words were out before he could stop them. Drayden's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes, a flicker of acknowledgement quickly buried. "Be that as it may," she said, "we need to discuss appropriate next steps." She slid a document across the desk. David recognized the format immediately, dense paragraphs, legal language, a signature line at the bottom. "This is a confidentiality agreement," Drayden explained. "It states that you will not discuss the events of last night with anyone, media, co-workers, family. You will not post on social media. You will not engage with any inquiries about the video." David didn't touch the paper. "And if I don't sign? Then we'll need to reevaluate your employment status." The silence stretched between them. David looked at the document, then at Drayden, then at his own hands, worn calloused, the hands of a man who had spent his life doing work that others considered beneath them. "You're asking me to pretend it didn't happen," he said quietly. "We're asking you to protect your job." "No." David shook his head. "You're asking me to protect her. Elena Cross. You want me to sign away my right to tell the truth so she doesn't have to face what she did." Drayden's composure cracked just for a moment. "Mr. Stone." "I've been here 27 years, David said. "I've cleaned every floor of this building. I've scraped gum off the bottom of desks and wiped fingerprints off bathroom mirrors and emptied trash cans full of things people didn't want anyone to see. I've done it without complaining, without asking for anything, without ever making trouble." He stood up. "And last night, a woman who's never looked at me once, not once in 3 years, dragged me in front of her friends like a circus act. She made a joke about marrying someone if they could beat the janitor, like I was nothing, like I was less than the chess pieces on that board." Drayden opened her mouth, but David wasn't finished. "I beat him, fair and square, and all I asked for was basic respect, a handshake, an apology. That's not harassment, that's not aggression, that's a man standing up for his dignity." He pushed the unsigned document back across the desk. "I'm not signing that." Drayden stared at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and pressed a button. "Security to room 2107, please." David felt the floor shift beneath him. "You're firing me. You're being suspended, pending investigation." Her voice had gone cold, mechanical. "You'll be escorted from the building. Your badge will be deactivated. You may retrieve personal belongings from your locker under supervision." "Investigation into what?" "Your unauthorized presence on the executive floor. Multiple occasions according to our security logs." David's eyes widened. "I cleaned that floor. That's my job." "Your assignment was levels 1 through 12. Drayden pulled another folder from her drawer. "You exceeded your authorized areas." "I was told..." "It doesn't matter what you were told." The door opened behind him. 2 security guards entered. "What matters is the documentation, and the documentation says you were somewhere you shouldn't have been." David turned to face the guards. One of them, a young guy maybe 30 with a buzz cut and apologetic eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir," he said quietly, "we need to escort you out." David looked back at Drayden. She was already closing his folder, dismissing him from her attention like he'd never been there at all. "This isn't over," David said. "Actually," Drayden replied without looking up, "I think you'll find it is." The walk through the building was the longest of David's life. They didn't cuff him. They didn't touch him at all. But everyone saw. Analysts stopped mid-conversation watching him pass. A woman from accounting pressed herself against the wall as if he were contagious. By the time they reached the service entrance, David felt like he was wearing a sign, "Fired," "Humiliated," "Done." He collected his things from the locker, a jacket, a lunch bag, the employee photo from March 2019, when someone had actually called him by name, and walked out into the morning light. The city was waking up around him. Buses rumbled past. People hurried toward office buildings, coffee cups in hand, earbuds in place, blind to everything outside their own routines. David stood on the sidewalk clutching a cardboard box of 27 years and felt something crack open inside him. Not defeat. Not despair. Rage. He walked 6 blocks to the little cafe he'd passed every morning for years, bought a coffee with cash because his Apex expense card had already been canceled, and sat in a corner booth with his phone. The video had gone viral. That was the only way to describe it. Overnight, the shaky camera footage had exploded across every platform David had ever heard of, and several he hadn't. News blogs had picked it up. Twitter was on fire. Someone had even created a remix with music and slow-motion replays of the checkmate. CEO mocks janitor at chess table. Then he wins, "Beat him and I'll marry you." Watch a corporate queen get humbled. David versus Goliath. The chess game that broke the internet. David scrolled through comments, his coffee growing cold in front of him. This man is a legend. The way he stayed calm while she laughed at him. King behavior. We need more people like this. Standing up to bullies in suits. Find this man and give him a medal. But there were other comments too. Darker ones. Fake. Obviously staged. The company's going to destroy him. You watch, she's going to lawyer up and bury him. He's done. You don't embarrass people like that and walk away. David's hands trembled as he set down the phone. He wasn't naive. He knew how the world worked. A janitor beating a CEO's hand-picked VP at chess made a nice story, but stories didn't pay bills. Stories didn't save jobs. And stories definitely didn't protect you from a corporation with unlimited resources and zero conscience. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He answered anyway. "Is this David Stone?" The voice was older male cultured. The kind of voice that belonged in boardrooms, which made David's spine stiffen immediately. "Who's asking?" "My name is William Chen. I'm a board member at Apex Industries, but I'm calling in an unofficial capacity." David's eyes narrowed. "Unofficial." "Very unofficial. I'd like to meet with you, Mr. Stone. There are things you should know, things that might clarify your situation." "Why would a board member want to help me?" A long pause. Then, "Let's just say not everyone at Apex is happy with the way things are being handled. Some of us remember what it was like before Elena Cross took the reins." David thought about the security guards escorting him out, about Drayden's cold smile, about the document he'd refused to sign. "Where?" he asked. "There's a diner on 5th and Madison. Red awning. I'll be in the back booth in 1 hour." The line went dead. David stared at his phone for a long time. Every instinct told him this was a trap, another corporate maneuver designed to bury him deeper. But what did he have to lose? He was already suspended, already humiliated, already on the wrong side of a company that had decided he was a problem. He finished his cold coffee and walked out into the city. The diner was exactly where Chen said it would be, a greasy spoon stuck between a laundromat and a nail salon, the kind of place executives didn't frequent unless they didn't want to be seen. David found the back booth occupied by a man in his late 60s, silver-haired, wearing a sport coat that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. He was reading a newspaper, an actual paper newspaper, and didn't look up when David approached. "Mr. Chen." The man folded his paper and gestured to the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming." David slid into the booth. "You've got 10 minutes. Chen smiled faintly. "A man who values his time. Good. Then I'll be direct." He leaned forward. "Elena Cross is not as untouchable as she believes. The video has caused significant damage, not just to her reputation, but to Apex's stock price. Several major investors have expressed concerns. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss what one colleague delicately called the optics problem." "And what does that have to do with me?" "Everything." Chen's eyes were sharp, calculating. "You're not just a janitor who won a chess game, Mr. Stone. You've become a symbol. The public has decided that you represent something: integrity, maybe. Dignity. The little guy standing up to power." David shook his head. "I'm not trying to be a symbol." "Doesn't matter. You are one now, and symbols have power." Chen pulled a folded paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. "Are you aware of this?" David unfolded it. His eyes widened. It was a petition. A printed screenshot from some website showing a title in bold letters: "Rematch, Elena Cross versus David Stone, live for charity." Beneath the title was a counter. Signatures, 247,831. "Nearly 250,000 people," Chen said, "want to see you play her again." David stared at the number. "This is crazy." "This is opportunity." Chen leaned closer. "The Northwood Initiative, a youth chess foundation, one of Apex's sponsored charities, has agreed to host the event. They're already securing sponsors. Major media outlets have expressed interest in broadcasting. It could be one of the most watched chess matches in American history." "I'm a janitor," David said slowly. "I play on a cracked tablet in my apartment. I'm not—" "You're a former state youth chess champion." Chen's words hit like a bucket of cold water. "I did my homework, Mr. Stone. State semifinals at 17, coached by Marcus Williams, one of the best youth instructors in the country. You were on track for something, weren't you? Before life got in the way." David's throat tightened. He hadn't heard that name, Marcus Williams, in over 2 decades. Hadn't thought about those Sunday afternoons in years. Hadn't allowed himself to remember what he'd lost. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "Skill like that doesn't disappear. It goes dormant." Chen folded his hands. "Elena Cross knows who you are now. She's already hired a grandmaster coach. She's preparing for a rematch she hasn't even agreed to yet. Because she knows the same thing, I know the same thing the entire internet knows." "What's that?" "That you're the only person who can beat her. Again. In front of the whole world." Chen stood, dropping a 20 on the table for a coffee he'd barely touched. "Think about it, Mr. Stone. The match is happening whether you agree or not. The only question is whether you'll be on that stage, or watching it from home." He walked out without another word. David sat in the booth for a long time, staring at the petition in his hands. 250,000 signatures. People he'd never met fighting for something he'd never asked for. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. He ignored it. But when he finally walked out of the diner, blinking in the afternoon sunlight, he knew something had shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't just a janitor with a mop and a grudge. He was a threat. And Elena Cross was going to come for him with everything she had. The next few days passed in a blur. David stayed in his apartment above the laundromat, ignoring calls from reporters, declining interviews, watching the world outside his window like it belonged to someone else. The view wasn't much: a brick wall, a fire escape, the occasional pigeon. But it was his. 20 years he'd paid rent on this place. 20 years of coming home to the same creaky floors, the same leaky faucet, the same smell of detergent drifting up from below. It wasn't much of a life, but it had been enough. Now, nothing felt enough. His phone buzzed constantly. Texts from old coworkers, Some supportive, most just curious. Friend requests from strangers. Emails from lawyers offering representation. Podcasters requesting interviews. Life coaches promising to tell his story. He ignored them all. On the fourth day, someone knocked on his door. David froze. He never got visitors. The last person to knock on that door had been the super complaining about a broken pipe. He walked slowly across the apartment and looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway. Young, maybe 30, with braided hair and a messenger bag slung over her shoulder. She was holding a folder and looking directly at the peephole like she knew he was there. "Mr. Stone," she called through the door. "My name is Rachel Williams. I work with the Northwood Initiative. I think we should talk." David's hand hesitated on the lock. Williams. The same last name as his old coach. He opened the door. She was shorter than he'd expected, maybe 5'3", with eyes that crinkled when she smiled. "Thank you for seeing me. I know you've been getting a lot of attention you didn't ask for." "You could say that." "Can I come in? I promise this isn't a sales pitch." David stepped aside. His apartment was small, cluttered, the furniture worn from years of hard use. Rachel walked past the kitchenette and stopped at the window looking out at the brick wall. "My grandfather was Marcus Williams," she said. David's breath caught. She turned to face him. "He passed away 3 years ago, but he talked about you until the end, said you were the best student he ever had." David sank onto his couch. He hadn't spoken Marcus's name out loud in 20 years. Hadn't allowed himself to think about those afternoons in the community center, learning to see patterns in chaos, finding hope on a 64-square board. He remembered me. He remembered everything. Rachel sat in the chair across from him. He kept newspaper clippings, your tournament records. He even had a photo of you at the state semifinals. You must have been 17, scrawny kid with a borrowed suit. David's eyes burned. He blinked it away. "When I saw the video," Rachel continued, "I knew it was you. I recognized the way you played. The patience, the precision. Granddad always said you had a gift." "Your grandfather was the one with the gift," David said quietly. "I was just a kid who liked a game." "No," Rachel's voice was firm. "You were a kid who could have gone pro. Granddad said it all the time. If things had been different." "They weren't different." David cut her off harder than he intended. "Things happened. My mother got sick. The center closed. I had to survive." "I know." Rachel leaned forward. "I'm not here to guilt you, Mr. Stone. I'm here to give you a chance." She opened her folder and spread papers on his coffee table. Flyers, schedules, sponsorship logos. "The Northwood Invitational," she said. "A charity chess tournament we've been running for 6 years. This year, we want to make it special. We want to give you the stage you should have had 30 years ago." David stared at the papers. His name was already printed on one of them under the heading, Exhibition Match. "I didn't agree to this." "No, but the world is asking for it. And so am I." Rachel met his eyes. "Not for the views, not for the sponsors. For the kids at Northwood who look exactly like you did at 17. Kids who need to see that talent doesn't have an expiration date. That dignity isn't something you earn by wearing the right clothes or having the right job." She stood. "Elena Cross has already accepted. Her PR team announced it this morning. She's spinning it as a gracious gesture, a chance to redeem herself through charity." David's jaw tightened. "It's not about charity for her. It's about revenge." "Probably. But does that change what you want to do?" The question hung in the air. David looked at the flyers at his name printed in bold letters. He thought about Marcus Williams dead 3 years still believing in a student who'd given up on himself. He thought about Elena Cross in her white dress laughing like the world was her private joke. He thought about standing up from that chessboard, shaking with rage and dignity, walking out of a room full of people who had finally seen him. "Tell me what I have to do," he said. Rachel smiled, not with triumph, but with something warmer. "First," she said, "we train. The next 3 weeks were the most grueling of David's life. Rachel connected him with a coach named Victor Okafor, a Nigerian-American grandmaster who'd retired from competition to teach. Victor was 62 years old, built like a scarecrow, and had the most unsettling stare David had ever encountered. "You're rusty," Victor said within the first 10 minutes of their first session. "Your instincts are good, but your calculation is 20 years behind. We have work to do." They met every day. Morning sessions for opening theory, afternoon sessions for tactical puzzles, evening sessions for full games analyzed, move by move, until David's brain felt like it was melting. "Again," Victor would say after each mistake. "What did you miss?" "I don't know." "Then look again. The board doesn't lie." David looked. He studied. He started seeing patterns in his sleep nights, forking kings, bishops, cutting diagonals, pawns promoting into queens on the 8th rank. He had forgotten how much he loved this game, and he had forgotten how much it hurt to care about something again. Meanwhile, the world kept spinning. The petition crossed 300,000 signatures. News outlets ran segments on the upcoming match. Someone started a hashtag, #HadJusticeForDavid, that trended for 2 days straight. Elena Cross gave interviews. Controlled, polished dripping with rehearsed humility. "I'm looking forward to the rematch," she told a morning show host. "It's an opportunity to bring attention to Northwood's wonderful work, and of course to show that healthy competition can bridge all kinds of divides." David watched the clip on his cracked tablet and felt his stomach churn. She was better at this than he was. Better at words, at performance, at turning everything into a narrative she controlled. He was just a guy who could play chess. That wouldn't be enough. But Victor had taught him something new, something his old coach had never mentioned. "You don't have to beat her strategy," Victor said during their last session before the match. "You have to beat her psychology. She's not afraid of losing a chess game. She's afraid of being seen, of being exposed, of the whole world watching her crumble." "How do I do that?" Victor smiled. "You already know. You did it the first time." "I just played my game." "Exactly." Victor leaned forward. "Play your game, David, not hers. Let her chase you. Let her overreach. And when she makes a mistake, and she will make a mistake, because ego always makes mistakes, be ready." David nodded slowly. He was ready. Or at least he would have to be. The night before the match, David sat alone in his apartment looking at the chessboard Victor had given him. It was old wooden, the pieces worn smooth from decades of use. Marcus Williams had owned it once. Rachel had found it in her grandfather's belongings and brought it to David as a gift. "He would have wanted you to have it," she'd said. David ran his fingers over the Black King, the same piece he'd used to practice as a 17-year-old kid, dreaming of tournaments he'd never play. 35 years later, he was about to play the biggest game of his life. Against a woman who wanted to destroy him. He set the pieces carefully one by one and whispered to the empty room, "Your move, Elena." David didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the laundromat rumble below and the city breathe outside his window. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the chessboard. Every time he drifted toward sleep, he heard Elena's voice. "Beat him, and I'll marry you." At 4 a.m, he gave up and made coffee. At 5, he showered. At 6, he put on the suit Rachel had brought him, gray simple, fitted by someone who actually knew his measurements for the first time in his life. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back was 53 years old. Gray at the temples. Lines carved deep around his eyes. Hands that had spent 3 decades pushing mops and emptying trash cans. But his eyes were clear, steady, ready. "You can do this," he said to his reflection. The words felt strange in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to himself out loud. "You've already done it once." His phone buzzed. A text from Rachel Carr's outside. "You ready?" David took one last look around his apartment. The worn furniture, the cracked tablet on the kitchen counter, the wooden chessboard Marcus Williams had once held in his own hands. He picked up the black king and slipped it into his pocket. Then he walked out the door. The drive to Northwood Hall took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Rachel sat beside him in the back of a town car, going over last-minute details, timing protocols, where to stand, when to sit. But David barely heard her. His mind was already at the board, running through openings, calculating variations, preparing for war. "David," he blinked. "Sorry." "What?" Rachel's face was gentle. "I said there's going to be a lot of cameras. A lot of people watching. If you need a moment at any point." "I won't." "I know. But if you do." "Rachel." He met her eyes. "I've spent 27 years being invisible. I think I can handle being seen." She smiled, but worry lingered behind it. "Just remember why you're doing this." "I know why I'm doing this." "Tell me." David looked out the window. The city was waking up, sunlight catching glass towers, people rushing toward their lives. "Because a woman looked at me like I was nothing," he said quietly. "And I need her to know that I'm not." Rachel nodded slowly. "That's a good reason. But don't let it be the only one." "What do you mean?" "Revenge is fuel. It burns hot and fast. But if that's all you've got, it runs out." She touched his arm. "Play for the kids watching at home. Play for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong at the table. Play for yourself, not the self that got hurt, but the self that refused to break." David turned her words over in his mind. He thought about the community center where Marcus Williams had taught him to see patterns in chaos. He thought about his mother working double shifts so he could have afternoons to study. He thought about every floor he'd mopped, every insult he'd swallowed, every time he'd made himself small so other people could feel big. "I understand," he said. The car pulled up to Northwood Hall. Through the tinted windows, David could see the crowd, hundreds of people gathered on the steps, holding signs, chanting something he couldn't quite hear. Rachel leaned close. "You ready?" David touched the black king in his pocket. "Let's find out." The moment he stepped out of the car, the noise hit him like a wave. Cheering, shouting, his name over and over from voices he'd never heard before. "David, David, David." He froze, overwhelmed. The crowd pressed against barriers, phones raised, faces bright with something that looked almost like hope. A little boy in the front row held a sign made of cardboard and marker, "Janitors can be kings." David's throat tightened. Rachel guided him toward the entrance, security clearing a path through the chaos. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Stone, how are you feeling? Do you think you can win?" "What do you say to critics who call this a publicity stunt?" But David kept his head down, focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Inside the hall was quieter, but the tension was thicker. Staff members hurried past with clipboards and headsets. Camera crews adjusted equipment. Somewhere a producer counted down to broadcast. "David." He turned. Victor Okafor stood by a doorway, arms crossed, his scarecrow frame silhouetted against the backstage lights. "Coach." Victor walked toward him, footsteps echoing. "How do you feel?" "Terrified." "Good. Terror keeps you sharp." Victor stopped in front of him, eyes searching. "Remember what I told you. Play my game, not hers. And wait for the mistake. Ego always makes mistakes." Victor nodded slowly. "She's been training with a grandmaster for 3 weeks. Her openings will be better. Her tactics will be stronger. But here's what she doesn't understand." "What?" "Chess isn't just calculation, it's character." Victor placed a hand on David's shoulder. "She's playing to protect her ego. You're playing for something bigger. That difference matters." "How do you know?" "Because I've played both kinds of games." Victor's voice dropped. "And the ones I played for ego, those are the ones I lost." A staff member approached, headset crackling. "Mr. Stone, 5 minutes to stage." David nodded. Victor squeezed his shoulder once, then stepped back. Make him proud, Victor said quietly. David knew he wasn't talking about himself. The walk to the stage felt like a mile. Each step echoed in the corridor. Each breath came slower than the last. David could hear the crowd beyond the curtain, thousands of people waiting, watching, holding their breath for a game that had somehow become bigger than chess. He stopped at the edge of the stage, hidden in shadow. Beyond the curtain, a voice boomed through speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Northwood Invitational Charity Exhibition match. Tonight, history meets destiny. A game that began in a corporate lobby will conclude on this stage in front of the entire world. Applause erupted. The sound was deafening. Introducing first, representing Apex Industries, the woman whose name has become synonymous with corporate excellence. Elena Cross. David watched through a gap in the curtain as Elena walked onto the stage. She was stunning. There was no other word for it. She wore a black dress that moved like liquid, her hair swept up in a twist that caught the stage lights. Her smile was radiant, practiced the kind of smile that had graced magazine covers and shareholder meetings. She raised a hand to the crowd, soaking in the applause, and David saw what he'd missed the first time they met. Fear. It was buried deep, so deep most people would never notice. But David had spent 27 years reading rooms full of executives, learning to sense danger before it arrived. And beneath Elena Cross's perfect facade, he saw a woman who was terrified of losing. Not the game, her image, her story, herself. And now the man who captured the world's attention with 12 moves and a borrowed suit. David Stone. The curtain parted. David stepped into the light. The roar that greeted him was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It wasn't polite applause or curious murmurs. It was raw, thunderous, a sound that seemed to rise from the floor itself. He walked to the stage legs, steady, despite the chaos in his chest, and stopped at the table where the chessboard waited. Elena stood on the other side, her smile frozen, her eyes tracking his every move. "Mr. Stone," she said. Her voice amplified by a microphone clipped to her dress. "I'm glad you could make it." "Ms. Cross." David kept his voice neutral. "Wouldn't miss it. Shall we begin?" He pulled out his chair and sat. The crowd fell silent. The arbiter stepped forward, a small man in a formal suit who looked uncomfortable with all the attention. "The rules are as follows. Standard chess classical time control. 40 moves in 90 minutes, then 30 minutes for the remainder of the game, with a 30-second increment starting from move 1, white opens." He looked at Elena. "Ms. Cross, you won the coin toss backstage. Your choice." Elena's smile sharpened. "I'll take white." Of course she would. Control first, as always. The arbiter reset the clock. "Players ready." David nodded. Elena nodded. "Begin." Click. Elena's hand moved. Pawn to d4. The queen's pawn, opening solid, flexible, aggressive. David responded instantly. Knight to f6. The Nimzo Indian defense, the same line he'd played against Porter a month ago. Elena raised an eyebrow. Nostalgic. Consistent. She moved again. Pawn to c4, expanding control of the center. David countered. Pawn to e6, building a fortress. The first 10 moves came quickly, both players following well-trodden theory. The crowd watched in hushed anticipation, phone screens glowing like scattered stars in the darkness beyond the stage. Then Elena deviated. Move 11. Instead of the standard bishop development, she pushed her pawn to h4, an aggressive thrust on the king side, signaling attack. David studied the position. This wasn't in the lines Victor had drilled him on. She'd prepared something new, something designed specifically to throw him off balance. He thought about her grandmaster coach, the 3 weeks of intensive training, the resources of a billion-dollar corporation funneled into crushing a single janitor. Scared? Elena's voice was soft, barely audible above the hum of the cameras. Thinking. Don't hurt yourself. David ignored the jab. He let his eyes drift across the board, not focusing on any single piece, just absorbing the pattern. The position was complex, double-edged. She was threatening his kingside, but her own center was slightly loose. If he could find the right response... There. He moved his knight to e4, centralizing, threatening, forcing her to react. Elena's eyes flickered. She hadn't expected that. "Interesting," she murmured. "I have my moments." She took his knight with her bishop. A trade she probably didn't want, but refusing would have left her pawn structure compromised. David recaptured with his pawn. The position had shifted. Her attack was stalling, and his pieces were finding better squares. Move 15, 16, 17. The game settled into a grinding positional battle, both players maneuvering for tiny advantages. The crowd grew restless, unused to the slow dance of high-level chess. But David felt it, the momentum shifting piece by piece, like water finding cracks in a dam. Elena felt it too. Her movements became sharper, more agitated. She reached for a rook, hesitated, pulled back. "Having trouble?" David asked. Her jaw tightened. "I'm thinking." "Take your time. I've got nowhere to be." Something flashed in her eyes. Anger, frustration, the first cracks in her composure. She moved her rook to an open file, trying to create counterplay. David blocked with his bishop. Calm, patient. "You know what I've realized," he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. "I'm not interested in your realizations. I used to clean your office, every night for 3 years. I'd empty your trash, wipe your desk, straighten the papers you left scattered everywhere." Elena's hand trembled slightly over the board. "Is this supposed to rattle me?" "No, it's supposed to tell you something." David moved his queen. "I saw everything. The reports you buried, the emails you deleted but didn't shred, the way you treated people when you thought no one was watching. That's enough. You're not a bad chess player, Ms. Cross, but you're a terrible person, and terrible people always think they can hide it." Elena's face went pale. She moved her knight, a defensive scramble that weakened her position further. David advanced his pawn, one square, then another. The commentators' voices drifted from the broadcast booth. "Stone is building something here. The pressure on Cross's position is mounting. She needs to find counterplay, or this is going to get ugly. Move 30. 31. David's pieces coordinated like a symphony. His rooks doubled on the open file. His queen infiltrated her position. His pawns marched toward promotion. Elena fought back, but her moves were desperate now. Reactive. She was no longer playing chess. She was playing survival. Move 35. David's bishop sliced across the board, pinning her queen to her king. The crowd gasped. Elena stared at the position, her face a mask of controlled panic. She had maybe 2 moves before the game was over. "You can resign," David said quietly. "No shame in it." "I don't resign." "Then watch." He moved his rook. Check. Her king retreated to the corner, the only square left. David's queen slid into position. Mate in 3. Elena saw it. Everyone saw it. For a long moment she didn't move. Her hands lay flat on the table, perfectly still. Her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. Then she reached out and tipped her king over. Silence. Then chaos. The crowd erupted. The sound was volcanic, a release of tension that had been building for weeks. People were on their feet, screaming, crying, hugging strangers. But David didn't move. He sat at the board, staring at the fallen king, feeling something he couldn't quite name. Relief, vindication. Something emptier than he'd expected. Elena stood. Her face was composed, but her hands shook as she extended one toward him. "Congratulations," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. "Well played." David looked at her hand. Manicured nails, perfect skin. The hand of a woman who had never scrubbed a toilet or pushed a mop or worn a uniform that marked her as less than. He didn't take it. The crowd's cheering faltered, confused. "No," David said. Elena blinked. "Excuse me?" "No." He stood slowly facing her across the board. "You don't get to do this again." "Do what?" "Shake my hand like it means something. Like this was just a game between equals." His voice grew louder, carrying across the silent hall. "You mocked me. You humiliated me. You made me a punchline for your friends. And when I beat you the first time, you tried to destroy me." Elena's smile vanished. "This isn't the place." "This is exactly the place." David stepped around the table, closing the distance between them. "You had me fired. You had HR threaten me. You told reporters I cheated. You did everything in your power to bury me because you couldn't stand that a janitor made you look small." The cameras caught every word, every expression, every tremor in Elena's composure. "That's not—" she started. "I'm not finished." David's voice didn't rise, but it cut through the silence like steel. "I've been invisible my whole life. I've cleaned your offices and mopped your floors and emptied your trash while you walked past like I didn't exist. And that was fine. I didn't need you to see me." He paused, letting the words settle. "But then you made me a joke. You pointed at me and laughed and told your VP he could marry you if he beat the cleaning guy. Like I was nothing. Like 30 years of hard work, of showing up, of doing the job nobody else wanted, like none of it mattered." Elena opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "So here's what I want you to understand." David stepped closer, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. "I didn't beat you because I'm smarter. I didn't beat you because I got lucky. I beat you because I've been playing games like this my whole life. Every day I walk into a building where people look through me, I'm playing. Every time I smile at someone who treats me like furniture, I'm playing. Every single moment I choose dignity over rage, patience over pride. That's the game." He turned to face the crowd, the thousands of faces, the millions watching at home. "And I'm not the only one. There are people like me everywhere, cleaning your hospitals, driving your buses, serving your food, raising your children. We're invisible, but we're not stupid. We're not less than. We're the foundation that holds everything up." His voice broke slightly, then steadied. "So the next time you walk past someone in a uniform, someone pushing a cart, someone doing the work you think is beneath you, remember this? Remember tonight. Remember that every single person has a story, a history, a skill, a dream." He looked back at Elena. "Remember that the janitor can be a king." Silence held the hall for a heartbeat. 2. Then the applause started. It began in the back, a single pair of hands clapping. Then another. Then a wave rolling forward, growing, crashing over the stage like a storm breaking. People stood. People cheered. People wept. Elena Cross stood frozen. Her hand still extended, her face a ruin of mascara and shattered pride. David looked at her one last time. "Apology accepted," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked off the stage, the crowd's roar following him like thunder. Backstage, Rachel was waiting. Her face was streaked with tears, but she was smiling, a full, genuine smile that lit up her entire being. "That was—" She shook her head. "I don't have words. I didn't plan it." David's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up. It just came out. It needed to come out. She hugged him quick and fierce. "My grandfather would have been so proud." David thought about Marcus Williams, the Sunday afternoons, the patient lessons, the belief in a kid who had nothing except potential. "I hope so," he said. Victor appeared in the doorway, his usually stoic face cracked by something that looked almost like emotion. "Well," he said, "I think you just gave the greatest post-game speech in chess history." It wasn't a speech. It was just truth. Same thing when it matters. Victor clasped his hand. "Go home. Rest. Tomorrow everything changes." David nodded, exhausted beyond words. But as he walked toward the exit past the buzzing crew members and shell-shocked sponsors and tearful volunteers, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Not triumph, not revenge. Peace. For the first time in 53 years, David Stone felt seen. And it was enough. The morning after the match, David woke to a world that no longer recognized him. His phone had died sometime during the night, overwhelmed by notifications. When he plugged it in and watched the screen come alive, the numbers made no sense. Thousands of messages, hundreds of missed calls. His name trending on platforms he'd never heard of. He made coffee and ignored all of it. The apartment felt different now. Smaller somehow. Or maybe he was bigger. He wasn't sure which. A knock on the door interrupted his second cup. David approached carefully, remembering the last time someone had knocked Rachel, offering him a chance he hadn't known he needed. He looked through the peephole and froze. Elena Cross stood in his hallway. She looked nothing like the woman from the stage. No designer dress, no perfect hair, no armor of makeup and confidence. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her face bare, her eyes red-rimmed from what looked like a sleepless night. David's hand hesitated on the lock. Every instinct told him not to open that door. This woman had tried to destroy him, had fired him, had sent lawyers and HR and security to erase him from existence. Opening the door meant giving her another chance to hurt him, but something in her posture, the way her shoulders slumped, the way she hugged herself like she was cold, despite the warm morning, made him pause. He opened the door. "Mr. Stone," Elena said. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual polish. "I know I'm the last person you want to see." "You're right about that." "I won't take much of your time. She swallowed hard. "I need to say something. Without cameras, without lawyers, just me." David studied her face. The woman who had laughed at him in that executive lounge, who had pointed at him like a circus attraction, who had whispered poison into reporters' ears, that woman seemed very far away now. "5 minutes," he said, stepping aside. Elena walked in slowly, her eyes taking in the small apartment, the worn furniture, the cracked tablet on the counter, the wooden chessboard still set up on the kitchen table. She stopped at the window, staring at the brick wall view he'd looked at for 20 years. "This is where you live," she said quietly. "Has been for 2 decades. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask." The words landed like a slap. Elena flinched, but didn't argue. "I resigned this morning," she said. David blinked. "What?" The board called an emergency meeting at 6 a.m. They wanted to discuss crisis management, spin control, legal strategies to minimize damage from last night. She turned to face him. "I told them not to bother." "Why?" Elena's laugh was hollow, nothing like the champagne brightness he remembered. "Because you were right. Everything you said on that stage about who I am, about what I've done, about the way I've treated people, it was all true." She sank onto his couch without asking permission, like her legs had simply given out. "I've spent my entire career building a wall," she continued. "I told myself it was necessary. That's what women have to do in business, be harder, colder, meaner than everyone else. Never show weakness, never apologize, never let anyone see you're human." "That doesn't excuse what you did." "No, it doesn't." Her eyes met his. "I humiliated you because I could. Because making someone else feel small made me feel powerful. Because somewhere along the way, I forgot that power isn't the same thing as worth." David crossed his arms. "Is this supposed to make me feel sorry for you?" "No. This is supposed to be an apology." Elena's voice cracked. "A real one. Not the performance I gave you on stage. Not some PR-approved statement crafted by lawyers. Just, I'm sorry, David, for all of it." The use of his first name caught him off guard. In all their encounters, the lounge, the HR meeting, the match, she had never once called him David. "I saw your face," she continued. "When I made that joke about marrying James if he beat you, I saw how it landed, and I didn't care. I thought it was funny. I thought you were just background, like the furniture, like the cleaning supplies." She buried her face in her hands. "Do you know the worst part? I've been thinking about this all night, replaying every moment. And I realized I've done it before, hundreds of times. Made jokes at people's expense, walked past workers like they didn't exist, treated everyone beneath my position like they were less than human. And now you want forgiveness." Elena looked up, tears streaming down her face. "No, I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not here to ask for it." She stood slowly. "I'm here because I needed you to know that you changed something. Last night, when you stood on that stage and said those words about being invisible, about dignity, about the foundation that holds everything up, something broke inside me." Broke. The wall. The one I've been building for 30 years. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I don't know who I am without it, but I know I don't want to be the person who made you feel like nothing." David was quiet for a long moment. He thought about all the nights he'd cleaned her office, imagining what it would feel like to be seen. He thought about the security guards escorting him out the HR documents they'd tried to force him to sign, the way the system had closed ranks to crush him. He thought about forgiveness, what it meant, what it cost, whether some wounds were too deep to heal. "You know what my mother used to say?" he asked finally. Elena shook her head. She said, "Bitterness is a poison you drink hoping the other person dies." I spent a long time being bitter, Ms. Cross, about my life, my circumstances, the things I gave up, the dreams I let go. He walked to the kitchen table and picked up the black king from the chessboard. "When you laughed at me in that lounge, you didn't see me. You saw a uniform, a job description, a punchline." He turned the piece over in his hand. "But that's not what hurt the most. What hurt was that I'd started to see myself the same way." Elena's breath caught. "I forgot I used to be good at something. I forgot I had a coach who believed in me, a mother who sacrificed everything, a kid who used to dream about championships and possibilities." He set the piece down gently. "You didn't take that from me. I gave it away a little at a time, every time I made myself invisible, so the world would leave me alone." "David, let me finish." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "What you did was wrong. The jokes, the firing, the cover-up, all of it. And I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, but I'm also not going to let it define me." He looked at her, really looked the way he hadn't allowed himself to before. "I don't know if you're sincere. I don't know if this is another performance, another angle, another game, but I know this: I'm done being angry. Not for your sake, for mine." Elena nodded slowly, tears still falling. "I understand." "No, you don't. Not yet." David picked up the black king again and held it out to her. "But maybe someday you will." She stared at the piece, confused. "What is this?" "A reminder that even the smallest piece on the board can change the game." "I can't take this. It's yours." "It was my coach's, Marcus Williams. He gave it to his granddaughter, and she gave it to me." David pressed the piece into her palm. "Now I'm giving it to you, because I think you need it more than I do." Elena's fingers closed around the king. She looked at it, then at him, her composure finally shattering completely. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Maybe not. But that's the thing about grace. You don't have to deserve it." David stepped back. "Your 5 minutes are up, Ms. Cross." She stood there for a moment, clutching the chess piece like a lifeline. Then she nodded once and walked to the door. "David." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me, even when I didn't deserve to be seen." Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. David stood alone in his apartment, staring at the empty space where she'd been. The morning light had shifted while they talked, casting longer shadows across the floor. He picked up his cold coffee and took a sip. It tasted different somehow, lighter, like something bitter had been filtered out. His phone buzzed. A text from Rachel turned on the news. He reached for the remote and clicked on the small television mounted above his refrigerator. Elena Cross's face filled the screen. A press conference live from Apex Industries headquarters. She stood behind a podium, the Black King visible in her hand. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady, despite her red-rimmed eyes. "I'm here to announce my resignation as CEO of Apex Industries effective immediately." Reporters shouted questions. Elena raised her hand for silence. "I'm not going to give you the prepared statement my lawyers wrote. I'm going to tell you the truth." She took a breath. "Last night I lost a chess match to a man named David Stone. But that's not why I'm resigning. I'm resigning because of what happened before that match. A month ago in this building's executive lounge, I humiliated Mr. Stone for my own amusement. I mocked him. I made him a punchline. And when he defeated my colleague with dignity and skill, I tried to destroy him instead of apologizing." The reporters went silent. "I had him fired. I threatened him with legal action. I told my PR team to discredit him. I did everything in my power to erase a man whose only crime was being better than me at something I thought I owned." She paused. "That's not leadership. That's not strength. That's cruelty dressed up in a corner office." She held up the Black King. "Mr. Stone gave me this piece this morning. He said even the smallest piece on the board can change the game. He could have hated me. He had every right to, but instead he offered grace." Her voice broke slightly. "I've spent my career accumulating power. Today I'm learning what it feels like to receive mercy." She set the king on the podium. "I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know who I am without this company, this title, this identity I've built. But I know this. I want to become someone who deserves the forgiveness David Stone offered me. And that starts with being honest about who I've been." She looked directly into the camera. "To everyone I've hurt along the way, employees, colleagues, rivals, the countless invisible people I walked past without seeing. I'm sorry. I can't undo the damage, but I can try to do better." She stepped back from the podium. "That's all I have to say. Thank you." The screen erupted with shouted questions and flashing cameras as Elena walked away. David turned off the television. He sat down at his kitchen table, looking at the chessboard with its missing piece. His phone buzzed again. "Rachel, the Northwood board wants to meet with you. Can you come in this afternoon?" David typed back. "I'll be there." He showered, dressed, and headed out into the city. The world felt different today. Not because the streets had changed, or the buildings had shifted, or the people rushing past had noticed him. It felt different because he had changed. The invisible man had been seen, and instead of shattering under the spotlight, he'd found himself. The Northwood Initiative headquarters occupied a converted warehouse on the east side of the city. David had been there once before for a brief tour before the match. Now he walked through the front doors like he belonged. Rachel met him in the lobby, her face bright with excitement. "Did you see the press conference?" "I saw it. The internet is losing its mind. Everyone's talking about the chess piece, the grace, the mercy. David, you're a folk hero. I'm a guy who played a game. You're a guy who showed the world what dignity looks like." She guided him toward an elevator. "The board is upstairs. They have an offer for you." "What kind of offer?" Rachel grinned. "Let them tell you." The boardroom was nothing like the sterile corporate spaces David had cleaned for 3 decades. It was warm, colorful, filled with children's artwork and championship photographs. A long table dominated the center where 5 people waited, older men and women with kind faces and calloused hands. "Mr. Stone," said the man at the head of the table. "Thank you for coming. I'm Bernard Hayes, board chair. Please sit." David sat. "We'll get right to it," Bernard continued. "Last night's event raised more money for Northwood than we've seen in the past 6 years combined. Donations are still pouring in. Sponsors are calling every hour. You've put us on the map in a way we never imagined. I didn't do it for publicity." "We know," Bernard smiled. That's why we want you. Want me for what? A woman across the table leaned forward. Program director, youth mentorship, chess instruction, community outreach. Whatever title you want, really. We're more interested in what you'd bring than what we'd call you. David stared at them. I'm a janitor. You were a janitor, Bernard corrected gently. You're also a former state champion, a teacher at heart, and if last night is any indication, a natural leader. We want to build something around that. I don't have a degree. I don't have credentials. I haven't played competitive chess in 35 years. You have something better. The woman smiled. You have a story, and stories change lives. David thought about Marcus Williams teaching kids in a community center that smelled like floor wax and hope. He thought about the little boy in the crowd holding a sign, "Janitors can be kings." He thought about every night he'd spent alone in his apartment playing games on a cracked tablet, wondering if the skills he'd buried would ever matter again. What would I do? He asked quietly. Whatever you want. Bernard spread his hands. Run chess programs. Mentor at-risk youth. Travel to schools and tell your story. Help us reach kids who've been told like you were told that they don't belong at the table. The words hit David like a wave. He felt his chest tighten, his eyes burn. I spent my whole life being invisible, he said, his voice rough. I learned to survive by not being seen. And now you're asking me to stand up in front of people and say, look at me, I matter. We're asking you to say it to kids who need to hear it, Rachel said gently. Kids who look like you did at 17. Kids who are about to give up on themselves because the world told them to. David closed his eyes. He saw his mother working double shifts so he could study. He saw Marcus patient and kind moving pieces across a worn board. He saw himself at 17, scrawny and scared, wearing a borrowed suit to a tournament he almost won. He saw himself last night standing on a stage, telling the world that dignity wasn't something you earned with the right clothes or the right job. He opened his eyes. When do I start? The first day was harder than he expected. David stood in front of a classroom full of kids, 12 students ages 8 to 15, all from neighborhoods like the one where he'd grown up. They looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Another adult promising things he probably couldn't deliver. I know what you're thinking, David said, leaning against the desk. Who's this old guy, and why should I listen to him? A boy in the back, maybe 14, arms crossed, attitude radiating off him like heat, smirked. You're the chess janitor. Saw the video. That's right, I'm the chess janitor. David picked up a pawn from the demonstration board. And a month ago, I was cleaning toilets for a living. Same job I'd had for 27 years. Same uniform. Same invisible existence. The smirk faded slightly. The boy's arms uncrossed. You know what changed? David held up the pawn. This. A game I learned when I was younger than most of you. A game I thought didn't matter anymore. A game the world told me was for people who wore suits and sat in corner offices. He set the pawn back on the board. The world was wrong. A girl in the front row raised her hand. Did you really beat that CEO lady? Twice. How? David smiled. Because she saw a janitor, and I saw the whole board. He moved to the demonstration board and began setting up a position. Chess isn't about being smarter than your opponent. It's about seeing what they don't. It's about patience when everyone else is rushing. It's about finding the move nobody expects, the quiet move, the humble move, the one that changes everything. He looked at them. 12 faces, 12 stories, 12 futures that hadn't been written yet. I'm not going to promise you that chess will make you rich or famous, but I'm going to promise you this: if you learn to see the whole board, to think 3 moves ahead, to stay calm when everything's falling apart, those skills will serve you everywhere. In school, in work, in life. He pointed at the boy in the back. What's your name? Marcus. David felt something shift in his chest. Marcus, the same name as his old coach. Marcus, come up here. The boy hesitated, then walked to the front of the room with exaggerated casualness. "Play me," David said. "For real. For real. You get white." Marcus sat down across from him. The other students gathered around, suddenly interested. "I don't really know how the pieces move." Marcus admitted his attitude, cracking slightly. "Then I'll teach you." David reset the board. Every master was once a disaster. The only difference is they didn't quit. He moved a pawn forward. "Your turn." The weeks that followed were the most fulfilling of David's life. He taught classes, ran tournaments, traveled to schools and community centers, telling his story to kids who saw themselves in him. The video continued to circulate, but now it came with context interviews, where David talked about hard work, dignity, and the power of believing in yourself when nobody else did. The donations kept coming. Northwood expanded into 3 new locations. A documentary crew began following David's work. Major chess federations reached out about exhibition matches. But the thing that mattered most happened on a Thursday afternoon, 3 months after the match. David was cleaning up after a class. Old habits died hard when Rachel appeared in the doorway. "Someone's here to see you." He looked up. "Who?" Rachel stepped aside. Elena Cross stood in the hallway. She looked different, not just physically, though she'd traded her corporate armor for casual clothes. Something deeper had shifted. The hardness in her eyes had softened. The tension in her shoulders had eased. "Hello, David," she said. "Elena." They hadn't spoken since that morning in his apartment. He'd watched her interviews, read the articles about her foundation work, seen the reports of her volunteer efforts. But hearing her voice in person was different. "I wasn't sure you'd see me," she said. "I almost didn't." David set down his cleaning cloth. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to show you something." She stepped into the room and reached into her bag. When her hand emerged, it held the Black King, the piece David had given her 3 months ago. "I've been carrying this everywhere," she said. "Every meeting, every interview, every moment when I'm tempted to fall back into old patterns." "Has it helped?" "More than you know." She set the piece on the table between them. "I've been working with a therapist, trying to understand how I became who I was. It's not easy. 30 years of walls don't come down overnight." "No, they don't." Elena looked around the classroom, the student artwork, the chessboards, the photographs of kids holding trophies. "This is what you're building," she said quietly. "Trying to." "It's more than I ever built." Her voice caught. "All those years, all that power, all those corner offices, and what did I leave behind? Stock prices and shareholder value. Nothing that mattered, nothing that lasted." She turned to face him. "I want to help, not for publicity, not for redemption, just to do something real, something that matters." David studied her for a long moment. He saw the woman who had humiliated him, the woman who had tried to destroy him. But he also saw something else, someone struggling to become better, fighting against years of conditioning, reaching toward a version of herself she didn't know how to be. "We need volunteers," he said finally. "People to help with tournaments, read to kids, set up boards, clean up after events." Elena's eyes widened. "You'd let me do that? It's not glamorous. No one will write articles about it. No cameras, no recognition. Just work. I know how to work. Do you know how to be invisible?" The question hung in the air. Elena thought about it for a long time. "No," she admitted. "But I'd like to learn." David picked up the Black King and held it out to her. "Keep this. You're going to need the reminder." She took it, her fingers closing around the piece. "Thank you, David, for giving me a chance I don't deserve." "That's what grace is," he said simply. "Giving people chances they don't deserve. It's what someone did for me once. Now I'm doing it for you." Rachel appeared in the doorway again, this time with a 12-year-old girl in tow. Coach Stone Destiny here wants to know if you can look at her endgame position. David smiled at Elena. Duty calls. You can start tomorrow. We open at 8. He walked toward the girl, leaving Elena standing alone with the chess piece in her hand and something that looked like hope flickering in her eyes. Behind him, he heard Rachel say quietly, "There's a storage closet that needs organizing, if you want to start now." And to her credit, Elena said yes. 1 year later, David Stone stood in the same hallway where his life had changed. The Apex Industries building looked different now. New management, new logo, new energy. But the executive lounge on the 29th floor still had the same quartz table, the same glass walls, the same view of the city stretching toward the horizon, and the same chessboard. "You sure about this?" Rachel asked, standing beside him. "No." David adjusted his tie, a real tie this time, not borrowed. "But I'm doing it anyway." The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago. Apex's new CEO, a woman named Sandra Chen, who had risen through the ranks over 20 years, wanted to honor David at the company's annual gala, a formal apology, a scholarship fund in his name, a ceremony that would be broadcast to thousands of employees worldwide. David had almost said no. The last thing he wanted was to return to the place that had tried to destroy him, to stand in front of people who had watched him be humiliated and done nothing. But then he'd thought about what Marcus Williams would have said, what his mother would have wanted, what the kids at Northwood needed to see. Sometimes you go back to the place that hurt you, not for revenge, not for closure, but to show them and yourself that you survived. "David." He turned. Elena Cross walked toward him, dressed simply, her hair pulled back, the black king visible on a chain around her neck. She'd been volunteering at Northwood for 11 months now, not occasionally, not when cameras were watching, every week, sometimes twice, doing whatever needed to be done. "I didn't expect to see you here," David said. "Sandra invited me. I almost said no." "Why didn't you?" Elena looked at the lounge where it had all begun. "Because I need to face it. The person I was in that room, I can't run from her forever. I have to stand where she stood and prove I've become someone different." David nodded slowly. "That takes courage." "I learned it from someone." A staff member approached, headset crackling. "Mr. Stone, they're ready for you." David took a breath. Rachel squeezed his arm. Elena gave him a small nod. He walked into the lounge. The space had been transformed. Hundreds of chairs filled the floor where executives had once gathered to watch him be mocked. Screens displayed Northwood's logo alongside Apex's new branding. At the front of the room, a podium waited beneath soft lights, and in every seat people. Employees from every level of the company, janitors, analysts, executives, security guards, cafeteria workers. The invisible and the visible sitting side by side. Sandra Chen stood at the podium, a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen corporate battles David couldn't imagine. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "1 year ago, something happened in this building that forced us to look in the mirror. What we saw wasn't pretty." The screens behind her flickered. The video began to play the original footage from that night, Elena's voice, sharp and mocking David, sitting down at the board in his coveralls. The room watched in uncomfortable silence. "A man was humiliated for doing his job," Sandra continued as the video played. "He was laughed at for daring to be skilled at something. And when he won, when he proved that talent doesn't care about titles or uniforms, he was punished for it." The video reached the checkmate. The crowd's gasp. David's quiet request for an apology. "We failed David Stone. This company, the leadership, the culture, the systems that allowed this to happen, we failed him. And in failing him, we failed ourselves." She turned toward the side of the stage. "David, would you please join me?" He walked forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The applause that greeted him was tentative at first, uncertain. Then it grew building until it filled the room like a wave. He reached the podium and looked out at the faces. Some he recognized: the receptionist, who had whispered encouragement during the first game, a security guard who had escorted him out with apologetic eyes, a few analysts who had watched from the balcony and done nothing. Others he didn't know at all. Hundreds of strangers who had heard his story and come to bear witness. "Thank you," Sandra said, gesturing for quiet. "David, I know this isn't easy for you, being here in this room. But I want you to know that your courage, what you showed that night and every day since, has changed this company." She turned to face him directly. "On behalf of Apex Industries, on behalf of everyone who should have spoken up and didn't, I want to offer you a formal apology. What happened to you was wrong. How we responded was wrong. And we are committed to doing better." David looked at her, at the room, at the screen still frozen on the image of his checkmate. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice steady, "I appreciate the words. I do. But I didn't come here for an apology." Sandra blinked. "You didn't?" "No." David stepped closer to the microphone. "I came here to tell you something. Something I've been thinking about for a year." The room fell silent. "That night when I sat down at that chessboard, I was angry, humiliated. I wanted to prove something to Elena Cross, to James Porter, to everyone who had ever looked through me like I wasn't there." He paused, letting the words settle. "I won the game, and for a moment it felt like victory. But then I went home to my apartment above a laundromat, and I realized something. Beating them hadn't changed anything. Not really. They were still rich, still powerful, still in charge of a building where people like me were invisible." He looked at the crowd, at the janitors in the back rows, the security guards standing along the walls, the cafeteria workers who had slipped in to watch. "So I asked myself, what would actually change things? Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel small." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a chess piece. Not the Black King he'd given that to Elena. This was a pawn. Simple, humble, the piece most people overlooked. "This," he said, holding it up, "this is how you change things. Not by becoming a king, not by taking someone else's crown, but by moving forward one square at a time until you reach the other side of the board and become something nobody expected." He set the pawn on the podium. "I spent 27 years being invisible in this building. 27 years learning every floor, every corner, every secret whispered by people who forgot I had ears. And you know what I learned? The invisible people are the ones who see everything." A few nervous laughs. David didn't smile. "We see who stays late to help a struggling colleague and who takes credit for work they didn't do. We see who treats the receptionist with respect and who barely makes eye contact. We see the truth behind the titles and the offices and the corner views." He looked directly at the executives in the front rows. "So here's what I want you to take from tonight. Not guilt, not pity, not some feel-good story about the janitor who got lucky with a chess game." His voice hardened. "I want you to see the people around you. Really see them. The ones who clean your offices and serve your food and watch your children. The ones who make your lives possible while you barely remember their names." He turned back to the wider audience. "Because here's the truth. Every single person in this room has a story, a talent, a dream they've buried because the world told them to stay in their lane. And the most powerful thing any of us can do, more powerful than any checkmate, any resignation, any viral video, is to look at someone who's been made invisible and say, 'I see you.'" The silence was absolute. Then from somewhere in the back of the room, a single person started clapping. David looked. It was a janitor, a young woman in gray coveralls, tears streaming down her face. Another person joined her, then another. The applause spread like wildfire, building until the walls seemed to shake with it. Sandra Chen stepped back, her eyes glistening. The executives in the front row stood, some looking uncomfortable, others genuinely moved. The security guards along the walls straightened, standing taller than they had before. David let the applause wash over him, but he didn't bow or wave or perform. He just stood there, a 54-year-old man who had finally found his voice. When the room quieted, Sandra announced the scholarship fund, the David Stone Opportunity Program, designed to support education for children of service workers. She announced a new company policy requiring unconscious bias training for all levels of leadership. She announced a partnership with Northwood that would bring chess programs to underserved schools across the city. David listened, nodded at the appropriate moments, shook hands with people whose names he forgot immediately. But his mind was elsewhere on a boy named Marcus, who reminded him of himself on a classroom full of kids who were learning that the board didn't care who held the pieces on a future he never imagined he'd have. After the ceremony, he found Rachel and Elena waiting by the elevators. "That was some speech," Rachel said. "I didn't plan it. The best ones never are." She hugged him quick and fierce. Granddad would have loved every word. Elena hung back, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You okay?" he asked. "I was thinking about what you said, about seeing people." She touched the black king around her neck. "A year ago, I stood in this room and couldn't see anything but myself. My image, my power, my need to be the biggest piece on the board. And now I see everything I missed." Her voice was soft. "Every person I walked past, every opportunity to be kind instead of cruel, every moment I chose power over connection." She looked at him. "You didn't just beat me at chess, David. You showed me what I was missing, and I don't think I'll ever stop trying to make up for the time I wasted." David nodded slowly. "That's all any of us can do. Try, fail, try again. You really believe that after everything I did to you? I believe people can change. I've seen it." He smiled faintly. "I've lived it." The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside, the three of them descending from the 29th floor where it had all begun. When they reached the lobby, David paused to look around one last time. The same marble floors he'd mopped thousands of times, the same security desk where guards had checked his badge, the same glass doors leading out to a city that had finally learned his name. "Coach Stone." He turned. A young man stood near the reception desk, maybe 19, nervous, wearing a Northwood polo shirt. David recognized him immediately. Marcus, the skeptical kid from his first class who had become one of his most dedicated students. "What are you doing here?" "Rachel told me you might need a ride home." Marcus grinned. "Also, I wanted to tell you I got in." David's heart stopped. "Got in where?" "City College. Full scholarship. Starting next fall." Marcus's voice cracked. "They saw my chess rankings and my essays about the program. About you. They said I showed exceptional resilience and strategic thinking." David stood frozen, unable to speak. "I'm going to be the first person in my family to go to college." Marcus continued, tears welling in his eyes. "And it's because of you. Because you saw something in me nobody else did. Because you didn't give up on the angry kid in the back row." David crossed the lobby in 3 strides and pulled Marcus into a hug. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice rough. "Your mother would be proud. Marcus Williams would be proud." "Who's Marcus Williams?" "Someone who changed my life the way I tried to change yours." David stepped back, gripping the young man's shoulders. "Go out there and change someone else's. That's how it works. That's how we build something that lasts." Marcus nodded, wiping his eyes. "I will. I promise. I know you will." They walked out of the building together. David, Rachel, Elena, Marcus, 4 people whose lives had intersected in ways none of them could have predicted. The city stretched before them, lights beginning to flicker on as evening settled in. "Hey, Coach," Marcus said as they reached the car. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just walked away that night, if you'd never sat down at that board?" David looked back at the building where he'd spent 27 years being invisible. "Every day," he admitted. "I think about how easy it would have been to keep my head down, to let them laugh and walk away and go back to my life. Why didn't you—" David thought about the question, about his mother who had taught him that dignity wasn't something you earned but something you carried. About Marcus Williams, who had believed in a skinny kid with nothing but potential. About every time he'd made himself small so the world would leave him alone. "Because sometimes," he said finally, "you reach a moment where walking away isn't an option, where every choice you've ever made leads to a single square on the board, and you have to decide who you're going to be." He looked at the young man, 19 years old, full of possibility, carrying a future that David had helped create. "I decided to be someone who stands up, even when it's hard, even when it's risky, even when everything tells you to stay invisible." He smiled. "And you know what? It was the best decision I ever made." 2 years later, on a Saturday afternoon, David Stone sat in the new Northwood Community Center, a building that bore his mother's name, funded by donations that had poured in from around the world, watching 30 kids compete in the annual championship tournament. The room hummed with concentration. Clocks ticked. Pieces clicked. Parents whispered encouragement from the sidelines. Rachel sat beside him, clipboard in hand, tracking results and brackets. "Destiny's up 2 games, she murmured. "If she wins this one, she makes nationals." David nodded his eyes on the 12-year-old girl hunched over her board. Destiny had come to Northwood 3 years ago, shy, angry, convinced she was stupid because that's what people had told her. Now she was one of the strongest players in the state, with a scholarship offer from a prep school that had never heard of Northwood before David's story went viral. "She's got it," David said quietly. "She sees the whole board." He watched her move her knight, a patient move, a humble move, the kind that looked like nothing until it became everything. Her opponent frowned, studied the position, then tipped his king over. The room erupted. Destiny looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "I won," she said. "You won," David confirmed, walking toward her. "You're going to nationals." She jumped up and threw her arms around him, crying and laughing at the same time. Behind them, the other students cheered, celebrating like her victory belonged to all of them. Because it did. Later, after the trophies were handed out and the families had gone home, David sat alone in the empty room, looking at the chessboards still set up from the tournament. Elena appeared in the doorway. "Long day," she said. "The best kind." She walked to the table and sat across from him. Between them, a board still held the final position of Destiny's winning game. "I've been thinking," Elena said. "About what?" "About the person I was when we met, and the person I've become." She reached out and touched one of the pieces upon 2 squares from promotion. "I used to think power was about controlling people, about being the biggest piece on the board, about making sure everyone knew you were in charge. And now I think power is about lifting people up, creating opportunities, seeing potential where others see nothing." She looked at him. "You taught me that." "I just played chess." "No." She shook her head. "You showed me what it looks like to turn pain into purpose, to face humiliation with dignity, to forgive someone who doesn't deserve forgiveness." She picked up the black king from around her neck, the same piece David had given her over 2 years ago. "I've been carrying this every day, remembering, learning, trying to be worthy of the grace you showed me." "Have you succeeded?" Elena smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded, nothing like the sharp performance he remembered from the executive lounge. "Some days yes, some days no, but I keep trying." David nodded slowly. "That's all any of us can do." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had started as enemies and become something else, not quite friends, not quite family, but something rarer. Fellow travelers on a road neither had expected. "David," Elena said finally. "Yes. Thank you for seeing who I could become when I couldn't see it myself." He looked at her, this woman who had mocked him, tried to destroy him, and then fought harder than anyone to prove she could change. Thank you for proving me right. Outside, the city hummed with its million stories, people rushing toward lives they didn't question, passing each other without seeing, missing the miracles hiding in plain sight. But in this room, two people who had once faced each other across a chessboard understood something the world often forgot: that every piece matters, that every game can change, that the smallest move made with courage and conviction can transform everything. David stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lights coming on across the city. "You know what my mother used to tell me," he said. "What?" "She said the world will try to make you small, baby, but you decide how big your heart grows." He turned to face Elena, and beyond her the room full of chessboards where children had learned to see the whole board, to think ahead, to believe in themselves. "I spent 53 years letting the world make me small," he said. "Then I sat down at a chess table and decided to be big." Elena stood and walked to stand beside him. "And now," David looked at the photograph on the wall, 30 kids smiling, holding trophies, wearing Northwood shirts. Among them, Marcus, now a sophomore at City College, tutoring younger students every weekend. Destiny heading to nationals. A dozen others whose lives had changed because someone saw them. Now I'm teaching others to do the same. He touched the glass, tracing the faces of children who had once been invisible just like him. "That's the real game," he said quietly. "Not the board, not the pieces, not winning or losing. The real game is helping someone else believe they can change their world." He turned back to Elena, to the room, to the future he'd built from the rubble of humiliation. "That's the checkmate that matters." Outside, the city kept moving. People kept rushing. The world kept spinning in its endless dance of power and poverty, visibility and invisibility, cruelty and grace. But in a community center that bore his mother's name, David Stone, former janitor, chess champion, teacher, survivor, had proven something that would outlast any viral video or corporate apology. That dignity cannot be given or taken. That respect is earned by how you treat those who have nothing to offer you. And that on a chessboard, as in life, every piece, no matter how small, can change the game.